This video is brought to you by viewers like you. Thanks for letting me do this for so long.
Stand ready for my arrival, worm.
Steady yourselves, the Nintendo Switch 2 is finally here, or at least it's officially real. Frankly, who knows when the pre-orders will sort themselves out and if the release date will stay put, but all things being equal, it's an exciting time. It's more powerful, more expensive, more magnetic, more girthy, more expensive, and more likely to make the original Switch look like a child's plaything. But change doesn't always come without difficulties, and I want to look at all these new features to see if they're any good or if this is just Nintendo doing what Nintendo does best. Throwing weird ideas at the wall and charging you too much to come along for the ride. So I'm ranking every new feature of the Switch 2 based on how much they actually help you, the player. Not developers, not third-party publishers, the people who bought over 150 million Switch 1s. Never gonna get used to calling it the Switch 1, that's disgusting. There's only one place to start, and that's at the bottom, which is where we'll find various piles of sewage stacked next to the inevitably awful news that not only is the Switch 2 more expensive than the Switch 1, but the games themselves are pricey too. First-party titles are heading towards $80 digitally and even higher for physical releases, and this is a worrying trend that Nintendo are adopting as we head towards release day. And yes, I know that other console manufacturers are doing the same, and that's also a terrible, shitty, bad thing, but at least those games are aiming towards hyper-realism with motion capture and dev teams in the high hundreds. Nintendo just tend to recycle the same handful of game engines like they're still using a free trial. On the surface level, it feels like you're paying more money for roughly the same experience, and that's a bad feeling to have. Even the console being more powerful is hardly worth a free pass for the additional cost. Yes, there's new technology, and we'll get to it in time, but you're looking at shelling out the best part of $450 for a Nintendo Switch 2, even more if you're after a bundle. Nintendo are pricing entire income brackets out of playing their console, and that is a worrying shift away from being the reliable, family-friendly games company. Why is everything so expensive? The next one's a bit bizarre. Nintendo decided to replace the rails on the Joy-Cons with magnetic attachments. So instead of sliding the Joy-Cons in, you're snapping them on, which is admittedly kinda satisfying, but it just isn't the same as the sliding rails that were such a huge part of the Switch's identity. I get the need to change the mechanism since the sliding rails were somewhat of a challenge for anyone not familiar with them, but you've traded pressing one button for another, and by changing it, you risk alienating anyone who isn't aware of this change. Even worse, the Switch 2 has casually sidestepped any backwards compatibility with older Joy-Cons. The hardware is fundamentally different, and there have been improvements with control sticks and button functionality, but those Joy-Cons weren't cheap, and to have them not carry over to the Switch 2 is kinda disappointing. Believe me, I don't want to have to place my faith in goddamn magnets. They scare me. I haven't got too much negativity left in me, but I've got a little bit reserved for just how much bigger the Switch 2 is now. This has been consistently touted as a good thing, but when I tried it out a week ago, I couldn't help but notice just how big it was in handheld mode. The original Switch was already pushing it for a handheld, but the sequel? Holy crap, it's wider, it's taller, it's heavier. My boy has been bulking, and it does take some getting used to. The new screen is most of the reason for this, and that's fine, but the size does inevitably make it feel less portable. It might not fit in bags that could accommodate the Switch 1, it does kind of feel like carrying around a small laptop with thumbsticks. But ultimately, this is less likely to be a deal breaker. Just be careful giving it to an elderly relative or a small child because it might just bring them to the ground. Anyway, let's try to be more positive, and I want to talk about mouse mode. A new fancy part of the Switch 2 is that you can sometimes turn the Joy-Cons on their side to use them like a computer mouse. This is wonderful for pointer controls and feels like a natural evolution from the Wii Remote and the gyroscope from the Switch 1. It worked great when I tried Metroid Prime Beyond, and it also clearly has a lot of use with any PC ports that need you to navigate a lot of UI, like a Civ 7. The extra control options have made Drag X Drive a really interesting concept that are worth trying out, but it's hard to escape its role as a gimmick. It's the 3D part of the 3DS, something you try a few times and then forget about, or even something that developers forget to use altogether a few years down the road. Really cool and clever, but I bet we don't see it reach its full potential. Oh hey, the C button! I never thought I'd ever see the day when Nintendo has a cut button. This is Nintendo attempting to stumble in drunk halfway through the party since everyone else figured out how to do voice chat decades ago. It does look good though, and the video chatting coupled with the screen sharing has the potential to kind of do the job of Discord with half the hassle. Not sure how much I'd use it, since I don't want people seeing what I do with my Switch 2, but there's something wrong here that few people have noticed and I feel moderately clever for having noticed. The game chat feature is tied to Nintendo Switch Online, which is sadly, in this nightmarish dystopian future of 2025, a paid feature. It won't be at launch and will be free for everyone until April 2026, but after that date, there will be a button on your Switch console and all of its controllers that is ultimately locked behind a paywall. This could be fixed by either keeping game chat free or by allowing users to remap buttons, but at this point, that's a car crash waiting to happen. Keep an eye on this one. For all the worries about the Nintendo Switch 2's girth, it was ultimately in service of having a larger screen, and hot damn, is it a large gentleman. We're looking at 7.9 inches, which is significantly above average. I remember seeing the OLED's measly 7 inches and nearly falling in, but this is a massive upgrade. It's not just size either, it's brighter and clearer in a way that now makes the OG Switch look a little bit sad and murky. Holding one at the premiere helped me to realise that they're trying to bridge the gap even more from handheld to almost like an iPad, and it feels like it's aiming for more of that kind of market. This is now a premium gaming experience and not a compromise made for the sake of portability. And oh my god, does the price show that? I'll be brief with this next one because it's incredibly simple, but there's now a second USB-C port on the top of the console, so it's now a lot easier to charge the Switch 2 in handheld mode and add accessories like the new camera. This is less of a win for intuitive design and more like common sense. If anything, it's genuinely shocking that a portable console like the original Switch that was designed to be played on tables could not be charged without third-party accessories, and having an extra USB port is both a hugely simple addition, but also so badly needed. We coped for 8 years, so I reckon we've earned this. Backwards compatibility was always likely given that the Switch 2 is a true sequel to the original Switch, but you can never assume when it comes to new technology. It's not 100% of the Switch 1's library, I've seen the word most banded around a lot over the last couple of years, but it's still comforting to know that most of your cartridges will still work on the new hardware, and your digital download should be mostly fine too. Even if the Switch 2 cost more, this one feature saves it from being a hard, brutal reset for your gaming library. You're not throwing out all those games after collecting them, you've actually got a relatively safe way of upgrading. It's clearly inspired by the Wii U, and I don't blame them. I had to double check this one, since it's easy to get your wires crossed given all this new information, but GameCube games coming to the Switch Online is a Switch 2 exclusive deal. I don't know if the original Switch would struggle to run Wind Waker or F-Zero, but Nintendo has still decided to go ahead with bringing back some of their most celebrated classics from what is now somehow more than 20 years ago. Yes, I would like to just buy the games instead of having to pay a subscription for the privilege, but listen, I'm 30 this year, and my son is 7. He is the same age I was when I first played Wind Waker, and I want to be able to share this game with him without having to dust off my Wii U or Wii. There's no escaping how convenient this is, and even if you have no nostalgia for these games, it's a good opportunity to try out something like Soul Calibur 2 or Pokemon Colosseum. Nothing says next gen like playing games from 2 decades ago. Meanwhile, in the future, Nintendo have finally taken some steps to get with the times, and the Switch 2 now supports DLSS, ray tracing, and is now just generally a lot more powerful. I suppose this was always likely to be the case as Nintendo sought out major improvements for their next console, but they've been playing catch up for so long that it is still genuinely a little surprising to say that their newest console is reasonably powerful now. Nintendo have always put innovation ahead of performance, and the Switch 1 epitomized that to such an extent that it felt like Nintendo were falling way behind on purpose so to completely distance their product from the competition. Now that the Switch 2 is a little more comparable, it does start to place itself as a competitor that can play games like Cyberpunk on the go. Plus now there's entire areas in the 2 Zelda games that run as intended. Hell, maybe people will give Pokemon Scarlet and Violet their flowers now they're not visibly struggling so much. Crazier things have happened. These last two may seem like small improvements, but they make a huge difference overall. The first is the fact that the Switch 2 now supports 4K, which, much like the hardware improvements and ray tracing, is not something I expected Nintendo to be showing off at this point in time. Obviously it's wonderful, and with Nintendo's library of games and IPs, it helps all the colours really pop out of the screen, but it now means I need to invest in a 4K TV to fully enjoy it, which is like one of life's most first world problems. To be honest, most of the time I'm using the Switch as a handheld, and it's for 1080p 120 frames per second in this mode that has me the most excited. A bit like the USB-C port only being on the bottom, I think we've grown too accustomed to a compromise with the Switch 1, and having a game that clear in front of you will have you judging the Switch 1 for being so fuzzy and 720p. The Switch 2 is standing on the shoulders of some lofty giants, I tell ya. Which leaves me with my favourite new change for the Switch 2, and I'm probably the only one who got super excited about 3D audio. I know my priorities are very backwards, but the way I see it, having 3D audio is pretty much the simplest addition that carries basically zero downsides. Maybe another case of why didn't the original Switch have this, but it's a wonderful thing that doesn't take any additional setup or is hidden behind a paywall, and in fact you're probably not going to directly notice it. All that 3D audio does is to help make games feel a lot more atmospheric and helps handheld mode feel unbelievably immersive. If we're trying to block out the world around you while in handheld, which is a lot easier now since the screen is fucking huge, playing a game with 3D audio is like maximum immersion. Makes you wonder why it took this long. And that's every change about the Switch 2, from worst to best. Do you agree, or is there something else I should move around in the video? Let me know in a comment down below, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you like and subscribe for more, and hit that bell for notifications of every new upload. The last video I made was about weird endings, so make sure you go watch that. And I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including the Green Scorpion, Sarah Malion, and Lima Pro. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.